Hello and welcome back everybody. Today we're going to do, I'm not sure what we're going to do. We're doing Dune Awakening, and the game is only due to come out on May 20, but you have access to the character creator and a benchmark tool. And for the system requirement, minimum or recommended, both are not available, to be determined later on. So in this video we're going to test the ARC GPU to say which one you should be able to play with. That will also give us a rough idea on the memory usage and the CPU usage. I'm going to use 32 to find what it should be as the minimum requirement for the memory, and as for the CPU it will be the i5-12600K. And keep in mind, this is only a benchmark tool, not a real gameplay. Maybe the benchmark is based on the gameplay, but it's not actual gameplay. You don't play that benchmark, you just run. Welcome to Response PC, I'm Dung. Let's benchmark on. Starting off with the lowest ARC GPU, the A310, we're going to check at 1080p and 720p, obviously at the lowest settings for every test, with FSR 3 enabled. That's the only upscaling available right now, at different upscaling quality, from quality to performance. Then you have frame gen enable and disable, if you're into that kind of Vaseline view. And this tool benchmark give you actually three benchmark. One is in a player base build, another one is in a village called Arco, and the last test is in a sandworm emerge. Starting off with the 1080p FSR performance and no frame gen, we get an average of 32 FPS, 30 FPS at 42 FPS. This does not look good for the A310. Now we'll pass quickly through all the settings and results I got with the A310. If you have more questions, feel free to ask me in the comments. First, in the first test, I have the 1080p lowest settings FSR performance. In the 3 benchmark, the player base, I got 32. In the Arco village, I get 30, and in the sandworm, I get 42 FPS. But we're playing at the performance with FSR performance, doesn't look good. It's Vaselinized. Then in the top right corner, it's still 1080p lowest settings with FSR balance. We get the 27 FPS, 28 and 39 FPS. That means trying to remove a little bit of Vaseline, we go under 30 FPS, which is not optimal. But in the middle, we drop the resolution to 720p, we keep FSR at native, and we get a playable experience, 30, 27 and 40 FPS. So we will remove the Vaseline, but we're playing at a lower resolution. But what do you expect? Are you playing on a A310? On the bottom right, I'm back to 1080p, still lowest settings, FSR native, but now I enable frame gen, and this was 29, 28 and 35 FPS, almost playable. And for the bottom left side, 1080p lowest settings, FSR quality with frame gen. Now we get 47, 48 and 52 FPS. Now it's playable if you don't mind using frame generation. For the system utilization, every time the GPU was pegged at 100% obviously, but we're using 4.5 to 6 GB of VRAM out of 4. The card only have 4 GB of VRAM, meaning we're using a lot of RAM of the system. Actually, if you have 16 GB of RAM with the A310, it won't be enough. We were always over 16 FPS in every test. For the CPU, the i5-12600K was in the 20% of utilization, meaning the CPU utilization, the CPU you can use can be way lower than the i5-12600. Next up, we have the A380. Now we have a 6 GB of VRAM. That will help a little bit. The game will be a little bit more playable, I can say. I again did 5 tests and go as follows. So on the top right, we have 1080p lowest settings, FSR balance, no frame gen. We get 42, 44 and 54 FPS. Now the A380 is highly playable. Probably the GPU for the Intel side that will be in the proposed minimum requirement. At least that's what I recommend so far. Then at the top right, lowest settings, FSR native, we go under 30 FPS. It will be 24, 22 and 32 FPS. In the middle, we have a 1080p FSR native and frame generation on. We get 36, 35 and 48 FPS. It's playable at a higher frame rate if you're okay to play the game with frame generation. At the bottom left, we have a 1080p lowest settings, FSR quality. We get 37 FPS, 38 and 48 FPS. And finally at the bottom right, we have 1080p lowest settings, FSR performance and frame gen enable. We get 74, 78 and 86 FPS. In terms of FPS, it's playable, but with frame gen at performance. It's like Vaseline, and then you generate Vaseline frame rate. I mean, you do whatever you want with those results. I'm just testing. And now one of my favorite cards, still favorite, the A580. This is an 8GB VRAM card and can manage this game really well, as you will see in right now. On the top left corner, we are 1080p medium settings, FSR native. We get in the tree test at 46 in the player base, 50 in the A380 village, and 63 in the sandworm. This is highly playable. We can crank up the settings. On the top right, we have a 1080p high settings, FSR native. We get 44 FPS, 47 FPS and 60 FPS. So I think you can even crank up to ultra settings. So 1080p ultra settings, FSR still at native. We get 35 FPS for the player base, 39 for Aroka village, and 51 FPS with the sandworm. And if you want more FPS and you don't mind the frame gen, you can turn the frame gen on at ultra settings. At 1080p, you get 61 FPS, 66 and 76 FPS. This is highly playable with the A580. And if you look at the card utilization, we have the peg at 99%. That's perfect. And we're using up to 7.8GB of VRAM. This card has 8GB, so that's perfect. That means we don't go shuffle the RAM of the PC. We don't need 16GB. It's using 14. So yes, your PC needs 16 to run, but the game will need less than 16 with the A580. And for the CPU utilization, we're in the mid-20s. So the CPU, this game is not CPU intensive at all. You probably can go lower i5 or even way older i7. Jumping to the A750, since the result is always similar to the A580 with the 8GB of VRAM, I did two tests, 1080p Ultra FSR native and 1080p Ultra FSR native with frame gen. The difference in FPS with the A580 is about 10%. So at Ultra FSR native, we get 38, 42 and 55 FPS, and with frame generation, we get 67, 72 and 87 FPS, a little bit higher than the A580. Next in line is the A770. I have the LE edition. At the 1080p Ultra settings FSR native, we're getting quite similar result to the A750 and A580. Really close, 41 FPS, 46 and 59 FPS. And if you want to crank the FPS over 60, you just enable the frame gen, you get 74, 78 and 94 FPS. You can also drop to high settings, but you'll be close to the 60 FPS, sometimes dropping under the 60 FPS. That is only if you also okay to use a frame gen. But since this is a 16GB VRAM card, you should be able to use for 1440p. And at 1440p high settings, without frame gen, FSR native, we get 51, 54 and 68 FPS. This is highly playable on 1440p. And if you absolutely want to use a frame gen at 1440p ultra settings FSR native, still we get 61, 66 and 76 FPS. So you can play this game at 1440p over 60 FPS if you use frame gen. But the game seems to be highly playable with this GPU without frame gen. And probably get a similar result with the A750 and the A580, because even with the A770 at 1440p, I never passed 8GB of VRAM, and the 750 and the 580 both have 8GB of VRAM. Finally jumping to the B series of Intel Arc, the Battle Mage, the B570. The top left we have 1080p, because this should be a 1080p card. We can play at the ultra settings, FSR native, and we get 44, 49 and 73 FPS. And if you want to enable frame generation with those settings, you're going to get 76, 82 and 106 FPS. But since we have quite a good result with the B570, jumping to 1440p, you can put the settings at high, still at FSR native, you get 44, 49 and 73 FPS. This is still highly playable. And again, if you want to push frame gen with those settings, you'll get 89, 96 and 114 FPS. I know the frame gen is not for everyone, but if it's for you, that's the result. For the GPU utilization, we were in the high 80s to the mid 90s. So we're not pegged at 100% utilization. For the VRAM, we're using 8.4GB of VRAM, a bit more than the A770. The GPU actually have a 10GB of VRAM, but we were using more than the A770, which never passed the 8GB of VRAM. And finally, the B580. I've tried the 1080p ultra settings FSR native, just for comparing with all the other cards, and we get 51, 57 and 82 FPS. Even the B580 cannot reach 60 FPS, but that is at the ultra settings. Tune it down to high settings and you get over your 60 FPS on every test. But this card is aimed at 1440p. So at 1440p, ultra settings, FSR native, we get 34 FPS in the player base, 37 FPS in the Arock village, and 57 FPS in the warm sand. We are just over 30 FPS, but I will recommend you to tune down to high settings to have a bit higher FPS than just passing 30. But it's your call. I won't tell you how to play your games. It's actually the minimum frame rate that just over 30 FPS. Otherwise, it seems to be always over 35 and more. And if you're the kind of person that don't mind to enable frame generation, that will give you 58, 61 and 84 FPS. This is at 1440p, ultra settings and FSR native. For the behavior of the GPU, the B580 was in the high 80% of utilization, so it doesn't even max out the performance the card can give, using 8.2 GB of VRAM out of 12. But there's room for more utilization or more improvement on the game or driver side. CPU utilization stayed the same the entire testing for every card, in the 20s to mid-20s percentage of utilization, and the RAM, beside the A310 and the A380, we were under 16 GB of RAM utilization. Dune Awakening is due to release on May 20, so by that time probably going to have more patching, update or whatever, maybe even adding DLSS or XeSS. But for the current benchmark tool, only FSR is available. If you have any question, feel free to write it in the comments below. Other than that, thanks to have come watching, see you in the next one, and subscribe.